Excellent. So I trust that y'all can see my slides, or at least this is the opening slide. Well, thank you very much for the allowing me to some time to chat about AI. I'm going to, as Trish mentioned a little bit earlier, I'm going to sort of take a step back in this talk and get some points, mention some points and talk about, some of the things that I think we all kind of in general need to consider about AI, whether to leverage, whether not to leverage, what some of those things that we need to understand as kind of a users and consultants to users of the AI type algorithms. What I am going to do, and so for that reason, it's like, why you should or should not use AI, and then put the use in quotes. I'll get back to them in a little bit, and really just trying to cut through some of the hype. So what I hope to do is kind of dispel some of the myths and common misunderstandings about AI, and maybe highlight some of the things, and a lot of things, and what we as consultants and our clients need to think about as users of AI-powered capabilities. And as again, as we as strategic advisors to our clients, rather than present arguments about why you should or shouldn't use AI, and why what are specific use cases. So this is not going to be a technical discussion, and in the spirit of roundtable, I'd like to kind of do this in almost like an ask me almost anything type style. So I'll talk a little bit in generality, and you can perhaps ask a little bit more specific questions. And please do ask questions as they come up. I would welcome questions as they come up, so that the discussions are as interactive as well as informative. Unless that starts to create a bit of a chaos, in which case I'm sorry and I apologize in advance. So some of you have heard me say this before, perhaps somewhere else, but it's worth repeating in the context, right? So wherever there's a lot of hype about something, the terminology gets all kinds of messed up. And so I want to clarify first that artificial intelligence is nothing more than a concept, right? It's just simply the ability or the competence that happens to be artificial. And I'm going to mention kind of machine learning in conjunction to this as well, because it tends to get all mixed up a little here with AI. And machine learning is really nothing more than a computational approach. And they're not even set of techniques, et cetera. It's a computational approach, right? There are people who say that, well, statistics old and needs to be replaced with machine learning. Well, that's kind of a nonsense. Statistical analyses can be carried out using machine learning approaches. And so again, it being a computational approach, it has nothing to do with what kind of analysis. Well, it has a little bearing, but not a whole lot to do with what type of analysis you do, et cetera. And so, we hear this whole AI, ML, thing all the time, but honestly, to me, that's kind of fundamentally misguided. The term has been kind of perpetuated largely by people who really don't know what it is. And those who do know and use the term either feel like they kind of need to go along with it just to, be accepted by certain communities, or some really just don't know the difference. I mean, they do that happen. So the challenge is that to an average person, it's really difficult to figure out which, who's on which side. And so, do they really know what they're talking about, or, are they really just kind of resigned to the fact that everybody else is talking, using the term? And so, and then just to close the loop a little bit, the term data science is a discipline, just like statistics is a discipline, just like mathematics is, computational sciences, and so forth is discipline, and so on. So, but don't get me all started about how all this differs from big data. I'm not going to go there today. The size of data really just makes it a technology problem, which just happens to broaden some of the approaches, the ranges of approaches that can be in play. So, but I'm not going to mention big data anymore. This is probably the last time I'm going to talk about it during this time. But anyways, just kind of keep in mind that artificial intelligence on its own is really a concept. And so I'll start there. So then what is, right? artificial intelligence. So one of the interesting things is recently people are starting to talk about AI literacy, much in the way that people have been talking about data literacy, right, in the last several years. And so what is AI literacy? It's the competency of the business or the person with respect to how well you understand what AI is and does. And so part of, I guess the objective here is today is to plant some seeds, of literacy around AI, so that we can think, intelligently about what it does and what it means to us. And so again, what AI is, again, it's a concept, right? As I mentioned, I like this definition of AI is that in a sense that it's an emulation of what a human does. It could be tasks, it could be thought processes, it could be perceptions, it could be a number of things, right? Through digital means. And so I'm sorry, does somebody have a question? Did I hear a question? Maybe not. Okay, so I heard somebody say like emulation of human tasks in earlier days. So this was like several years ago. I think today it's a little bit broader than just the emulation of tasks. But it's still, the bottom line is that AI is really just an attempt to emulate what humans do. And so, under this definition, a lot of things can be considered to be within the realm of artificial intelligence. And a lot of things do get called AI and have been for a long, long time. Now, the fact that this is an emulation, right? We're talking about emulations. Some emulations are good, others not so much, right? So AI itself is not task. It's not thought processes themselves. Again, AI is a concept. And what we see or typically talk about is really an embodiment of the concept that is AI. The fact that it's an emulation is a little bit also different from a digital twin, which is, if you have not heard, or if you may have heard of digital twin, which is really a digital representation or a copy of a physical thing in a digital form, rather than an emulation. So digital twin being sort of just essentially a static copy of, as opposed to AI being emulation of what we do. The sad thing is that still, right, very few people can, actually articulate what this is. And so the vast majority of what you see out there and hear out there about the definition of AI, to me, is garbage. So I'm sorry to say, but so it's kind of up to us to make sure we have our head straight when it comes to AI. So what it is not, right? It's not a tool. It's not a software. It's not a specific feature within the software. It is not a thing, right? It's not a set of techniques. It's not a set of methods. It's not a set of computational algorithms. And so this happens all the time, right? This kind of trying to tangibilize something that is not really tangible happens all the time in data and analytics. So I've lived through this, through having to explain, no, that's not what it is all the time. But, the fact is, and tools and techniques and methods are a lot more tangible. And so it's easier to talk about than concepts and ideas. And analytics tend to suffer a lot from this because analytics at the end of the day sort of produces ideas or knowledge as an end goal. So there's, in the purest definition, analytics doesn't produce anything tangible. It produces knowledge, it produces insights. Right. And that tends to confuse a lot of people and generates really lots of false expectations all the time because we want things to be tangible. Right. Another thing AI is not. It is not new. Right. We've been hearing about it a lot, but we've been, quote unquote, using AI for a very long time. So what are some of the examples of AI applications that we know, but perhaps we never thought that, was AI, right? We can even go back to automated rules, just, repeating automated rules, many, many times, et cetera, et cetera. That's an emulation of a human task, right? Or emulation of what human does, just in a machine format. Predictive modeling and classifiers. So I spent a lot of time in the financial services, and credit decisioning with scoring is a classic example, right? It's been around since the 50s and the common use since the 90s. That under the general definition of AI, or general kind of understanding of what AI is, will fall into that category. Recommenders, right? Popularized by Netflix. So that recommenders are really conceptually the same as the next best action algorithms and other sort of prescriptive analytics. But it's, if you were sitting there and recommending something else to somebody else, it's like that's something a human would do, right? And so that's being emulated by machine. On a more personally immediate level, right? How many of you guys do not like predictive text on your phones, right? It is trying to get in front of what you're going to type. Again, it's trying to emulate and just trying to do so by emulating what humans would type, right? Other things, language detection in Word. In Microsoft Word, your little Word document, it can actually detect languages. Sometimes I get a little frustrated because it keeps thinking that I'm typing in Portuguese when I'm not. But anyways, those things, right? These things that we don't really think about AI, looking at the really conceptual kind of view of AI, those are all based on emulating what we as humans do, right? Now, and then, of course, just a couple of days ago, right, there's been a joint announcement between Microsoft and Meta about the Llama 2 and how Microsoft plans to integrate AI into Windows. So it's like, whether we call it AI or not, it's already happening, and we are living it today. We are, quote unquote, using AI pretty much every day, whether we identify it so or not. And in many cases, it's really just a matter of leveraging AI capabilities to improve like the functionality of something, and less about our conscious decision to use it. And that's why I keep doing the air quotes about use AI, because a lot of times it's not so much a conscious effort from a day-to-day perspective. It is true that AI is, often what drives many of the functionalities that we desire as consumers. So it's not the functionalities themselves, but sort of what's behind it. And again, every so often, this something that appears new becomes super popular to describe something that's been around for a long time, and it gets hyped up because it sounds new. But the term artificial intelligence itself has been around since the 1940s. So almost I guess it's not quite a century, but it's getting up there. It's been around for a long time. So it sort of reminds me of the when the SpaceX Starship blew up back in April, and there was this whole thing about people started calling it like rapid unscheduled disassembly, and people mocked about it because it sounded like a euphemism, but it's actually, the term had been around since the 60s. So it's like, there are all these things that new to us doesn't mean that it's actually new. And it's just, we're just starting to recognize it. And that for that reason, it feels like it's new, but it's really not, right? It's been going on the whole time. So looking at, if we're to kind of classify different types of AI applications, how AI gets used. The first one is classification, identification, estimation. Basically, typically done in volume, you'd repeat it in mass, etc. So then if you had like 20,000 images, you need to classify, is this a cat or is it not, right? The looking at the image, and we can do that, humans can do that, but probably not 20,000 in one sitting, right? Another example, right, that we may not think about, OCR, optical character recognition, is essentially an image classification. So those things have been around for a while. Maybe not an entire century, but it's been around. Anomaly detection, is it a fraud or not, right? So classification or identification or estimation. In these cases, the individual objective problem is relatively straightforward and often, often static. Like, images don't change. You have to figure out whether it's this or that. But you just have like a whole bunch of them, right? 20,000 of them. And so it's a lot of times the goal there is automation or making things a little bit easier for the humans. There is this whole paradox about simplest problems. Some of the really simple problems require very complex techniques. So this is a perfect example. It either is a cat or not, right? But then a lot of times it requires a really complex technique from a technical perspective to actually classify those things. The flip side of that is that the complex problems are generally better off with simpler techniques, but we won't go there today. The next type of AI is, I think, what we've been talking about a good bit with generative AI, or example is ChatGPT, where it would like write contents, paragraphs, things like that, or create images and videos, right? Videos, it's basically images because there's just a whole bunch of images in succession, and so they're all kind of basically the same thing. Some really funny and interesting things that have come out, right? I don't know if y'all have seen in the last few days, I think, somebody kind of created an AI-based mashup of Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg in a romantic photo shoot at the beach. It looks pretty funny. There's been a picture of supposed picture of a peafowl chick that's so cute, and it's all like blue and so cute going around. It's not real. I've gotten a couple of ads about generating professional looking headshots. So what you do is you like send like 30 of your pictures or whatever, and they have some sort of AI-ish algorithm behind it, and then they can actually generate a headshot for a relatively small amount of money. And then, of course, on the kind of a dark side of things, deep fake, right? So you can create funny and entertaining things. On the other hand, you can create things that could be rather destructive. Another type of AI applications, task automation, right? So these are absolutely meant to make our lives easier. So whether they are working as intended is a different story, like in case of a predictive text, but anyways, autonomous vehicles is one of those things that I think we think about a lot. Again, predictive text kind of falls into this category. Chatbots falls into this category. A lot of micro or tactical decisions, especially in math. So a lot of the classification stuff that I talked about earlier, if you do it many, many times automated, then sort of kind of goes into this category. You can actually write a code. You can actually have a code to generate code for you. It's funny because you don't really need AI to do that. I used to do that back in 2001 when I was writing code in this old language called SAS, and I would actually write a SAS code to write a SAS code. And then, of course, prescriptive analytics is basically nothing more than a prediction followed by the execution of the recommended action. And so that falls into kind of a task automation type stuff. And you can string these different types of AI sort of application and implementation to create like a whole, whole flow of emulations, right? And then, of course, there is this kind of artificial general intelligence that a lot of times, what we think of a lot of times when we see things in movies and things like that, it's kind of a completely autonomous thing. This is still very, very far away, and there isn't one today. So, but fundamentally, the question surrounds the increasingly blurred line between, because it is emulating humans, right? Where the lines between human and emulation of humans starts to kind of get a little blurry. And so the one way to look at it is like, okay, is it informing your decision or is it making the decision for you? And so, and these decisions can range from like a whole bunch of little, decisions on which, each one on its own is kind of rather inconsequential to, something more important as, existential decisions, it's like life or death even, right? So the AI capabilities are there to help you do things, but what are you, what is it, where do you draw the line, right? So that kind of brings up to some of the critical things to consider about AI applications. The first thing is, first set of things, or first type of things, is the limitations and challenges of the AI algorithms themselves. So there's several limitations that we have to kind of keep in mind. At the end of the day, again, I'm not going to tell you whether to use or not to use AI-driven functionalities, but these are kind of things that we as consumers, as well as advisors to our clients, need to keep in mind, right? So, the first limitation is that I'll name four. The first limitation is that despite what you believe or have heard, right, the current AI algorithms are really just nothing more than a repackaging of the data that already exists. You can think of it as a remix, right? It's all a synthesis of existing information that creates just a different manifestation of what already exists. So, and even generative AI doesn't really generate anything net new. So what happens, right? So what these things kind of spit out, it's often biased to the data that already exists. Actually, there are certain ways to correct some of that, but at the end of the day, there's no way to correct 100% of the bias. And so if the underlying data is biased, then what it's going to spit out is also going to be biased. So then that's going to be reflected. If the good portion of what exists as data is wrong or biased, then that's going to be reflected in what the AI systems produce. So like text generation, right? So that's going to reflect the general sentiment of the public at large. If the good chunk of what is said about a topic is wrong, the answer will likely be wrong. This is a little bit cruel, but as somebody said, it reflects the stupidity of the general public. But there's some truth to that. The second limitation has to do with the incompetency of the AI-driven application. So you got things that it will make errors, right? You've heard things like hallucinations. So the algorithms are far from being perfect, and some with pretty striking fail rates. And so in some other cases, being wrong might be kind of rare, but if you're wrong, it comes with a really, really heavy cost. So from a wrong classification perspective, right, you could have false positives, false negatives, etc. And you do have to know how to quantify the errors in aggregate and understand their implications, because then that actually becomes a statistical problem at that point. ChatGPT, so I had this recent experience with ChatGPT, and I just really wanted some quick summary of a summary explanation of customer journey. So I said, explain customer journey in 3 paragraphs. And it answered something, it came up with an answer that sort of sounded just plausible, but I just did not like the answer. So, at the end of the day, I ended up resorting to Google search for articles that I thought were a little bit more appropriate for what I was looking for. So there's that whole thing of, okay, it may spit out things that sound good, but it may not be entirely what you're looking for. The third limitation has to do with inadequate personalization, right? So it may not always align with your personal preference. In the name of personalization, AI capabilities is being used quite a bit, because then it can sort of do a lot of calculations, for lack of a better explanation, to make whatever tool that it is or whatever it is you're using sort of fit your preference. But it doesn't always align with your personal preference. So again, predictive text, I had to turn it off because it's like it never says what I want to say. And it could be that because the algorithm itself is wrong, or it's being biased, or it's just the algorithm itself is too generalized. So that's the third limitation. The fourth limitation is kind of the human incompetency of the developer, basically the developer not knowing what he or she is doing. This is not a small problem. There's a semi-famous example of classifying huskies versus wolves, and the images of huskies versus the wolves, and it started classifying things wrong, and so then it looked at what it was doing, and it turns out that it wasn't really classifying huskies versus wolves, but I think what happened was the pictures of the huskies all had snow in the background, and so it was picking up on the snow and not really picking up on the different types of the canine. So yeah, it might on the surface be doing something, well, but if you don't know what it is that it is doing, and if the developer does not know and cannot explain what it is doing and why it's doing, then the fact that then an algorithm actually can do something doesn't really, it does not mean it makes sense, right? And the errors from not knowing what and how it does what it does can have quite strong implications. And of course, if the developer does not understand that, then the algorithm is incompetent by design. And so it's designed into the solution. That's one of those things from us as users, perspective from the users, we have to be aware of even going back to credibility of who developed it and so forth. So that's like a giant list of the big explanations of limitations. I wanted to focus here because there are a lot of limitations. It does good things. It's useful in certain cases, but it does come with limitations, and we need to understand what those are. The second critical thing to consider about, as we sort of get into this whole AI thing is, do we know what we are doing with AI? So one part is like there's the challenge with the AI algorithms themselves. The other part is us, right? Our challenges with ourselves. And so that kind of comes back to the whole AI literacy idea. And users without enough understanding to know what he or she is doing with AI-driven functionalities or capabilities is a big problem. We need to be able to understand well enough, not technically, not in super detail, but in general terms, we need to understand what it does and its implications, because ignorance is not bliss, right? And that sort of highlights, the challenges that I had with my little prompt about customer journey. I did not like the response, and sometimes it will, give you answers that sound credible, but it's completely garbage. And so you have to know enough about the subject itself that you're asking ChatGPT to respond to. Or it's not just ChatGPT, right? This is really just any large language model. You have to know enough about the subject in the first place to make use of it, because then you can run into some pretty interesting risks. So because this is, we are in IMC colleagues, and we talk about ethics a good bit, so I cannot not talk about ethics here. Something that we need to consider, right? Ethics of the algorithm itself. Remember, this is an emulation of something that human does, but then, okay, so then whose values is this the AI algorithm going to emulate? We all, people have different values, and we have, you get into a situation that has competing values, right? And which is where big part of where ethics comes in. AI, depending on how we use the AI capabilities, that we have to consider how it's making decisions and how it's actually doing things, and understand, does it really reflect, the value, my values? Does it reflect the value of the users? Does it, those kind of things? Because if it were a human, then we'll be talking about human ethics, but that can be translated directly to the AI algorithms themselves, and so then we have to be concerned about, okay, what is the ethics? What kind of ethics does this algorithm have? And of course, the ethics of the user or developer, right? So that can be anything from intentionally inappropriate use to fraud to social engineering, to fake articles and videos and images and fake social media posts, and all the stuff, right, that we hear about, and they get talked about quite a bit. And now some fake contents, again, are meant to be for pure entertainment and can be quite funny, like that whole photo shoot between of Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg. But the number of people, so you have to, we have to concern ourselves with, like, are there people who will believe anything that they see, right? And what are you trying to influence and why, right? And this isn't just limited to politics. I mean, it goes pretty much anywhere and everywhere. Unintended consequences. This is always a fun thing to talk about. So yeah, it all sounds great. It's going to make our lives easier. It's going to automate things. It's, I can focus on other things. So fairly recently, there was this, I don't know if you all come across the video of this accident clip between a Tesla and a Honda. Again, this is not so much about whether Tesla is good or bad, et cetera. But anyways, there was a situation on the highway and on traffic where Tesla was able to react to a situation that was dangerous and therefore avoid the accident, any accident, because the car could react fast enough and did appropriate things. Well, the car that came behind it could not, right? So that whole thing started a chain of things, the events afterwards where the Honda that came behind it could not react to it, went across, flipped over, et cetera, and just got into a giant accident. So yeah, the people in the Tesla were fine, but the people behind them, we can get into like, okay, they should have had enough distance and so forth. Yeah, let's not. But this kind of brings up an interesting conversation about, okay, great, it helps me, but am I doing what am I causing down the road, right? So what are some of the unintended consequences? Because if we think long and hard enough, we can come up with other examples of machines doing something really good, but at the expense of something else, or in such a way that humans around that cannot react fast enough or cannot accommodate in the way that, because the machines just don't react the same way the humans do. So that's kind of an interesting thing, discussion that's coming up. And it's been around for a while, but it's sort of getting up to the surface, right? And then, of course, there's the whole legal and regulatory implications, right? So who owns the IP of the output generated by an AI-powered tool? That's been a big discussion. Another kind of question that has come up quite a bit has to do with informed consent, the idea of informed consent from the owners of data. The algorithms were trained using, any number of data available, et cetera. Some of these large language models were trained on openly available data. Depending on which jurisdiction, you might have informed consent or, other data protection and privacy issues, even if it's out there in public, et cetera, et cetera. And so you get into, and then it's going to vary by jurisdiction. And so there's this whole kind of a legal regulatory complications that arise with this. And the big challenge here is that information technology regulations and laws always lag behind in reality. And so the question becomes, as technology evolves faster and faster, when will regs be unable to keep up with the pace of change? I mean, forget humans, right? So humans, is it going to be a Wild Wild West type thing? It's because the regs just cannot keep up with what's going on in real world with respect to technology. So what does it mean for us consultants? And I want to put this really from a consultant sort of frame. First of all, we meaning humans, have a say in how AI works. We humans still make the decisions, some of which can be automated so that you don't have to do it yourself. But it's still our decisions that are being automated, right? There are pros in gains in efficiency or even accuracy, right? Versus the cons. And that's the cost of the limitations. And that is still a human decision. AI will not replace humans as long as we don't let it replace us. One of the kind of a sports, coaches sayings, right? You're either teaching it or allowing it to happen. It's the same thing here. If AI replaces humans, we let it happen. And so then, okay, where is that line, right? Think if you were thinking about, like in the terms of, okay, I delegate what I do to a bot, what are you comfortable delegating to a bot? So, of course, there's all these dumb things that we don't want to do ourselves, it's kind of little task and menial things. Okay, that's fine. We have to think about the problems and the unintended consequences from not being clear about, where we draw the line. So if we have to have at least make a conscious decision of where we're going to draw that line. Now, is the task critical or even useful to our understanding of the problem? Maybe, should human understanding be delegated to a bot? So there's that. It's conditional delegating or unconditional delegating to a bot. So those are kind of questions that I think we'll want to go through. One thing for sure, the development of AI, right? The AI capabilities will force us to evolve. It won't eliminate us unless we let it eliminate us, but it will force us to evolve. It won't eliminate employment, but it will evolve the nature of the jobs available, right? People thought RPA, robotic process automation, was going to eliminate jobs. Well, it hasn't. It just changed the nature of our jobs. And of course, AI is already everywhere. So we can name many things that we did differently even 5 years ago. And, we just kind of evolve and go along with it. AI on its own is not a solution for us to use, again, air quotes. So what it is incorporating concepts is an approach where it does make sense, right? And it's just one of the hows. We all know, focusing on the how before the what always gets us in trouble. So I would sort of leave you with that one thought here. AI on its own does not solve business problems, but the things incorporating AI do, right? That means that we as users do not, quote unquote, use AI per se, but we use it in, we use the things that incorporate AI. And the sooner we can get this into our heads and into our clients' heads, more effective and less confused we're all going to be in leveraging AI capabilities. And then because we're consultants, this is kind of one of my pet peeves, but there is no such thing as an enterprise AI strategy. You can have strategies for automation, strategies for making things cheaper, easier, insightful, et cetera, But again, AI being a concept, it doesn't make sense, right? But you don't have, you don't have enterprise level strategy to emulate something. Emulate humans. So it just doesn't make sense. And I mentioned this because the whole, okay, we have to have an enterprise AI strategy type mindset creates the hammer looking for the nail to hit. And then they fail to show the value because then they find out that they have a whole bunch of screws and not nails. And it's not the right focus. And so they're just, it kind of makes me cringe a little bit whenever I hear enterprise AI strategy. So what does it mean, right? So like anything else, be wise and responsible when it comes to AI and its capabilities. Understand and know, at least in generality, right, what you're doing, why you're doing it, and the consequences are. Understand the costs and limitations, strengths and weaknesses of the particular AI application you're looking at. And, again, it's a good example, and keep coming back to ChatGPT because I think it's something that everybody talks about today, but it is a good research tool, and it's good for generating ideas, but you kind of have to know enough about the topic, right? You have to know how to use it, you have to know how to leverage it, you have to know what it's good for, et cetera, or you could end up saying something that is completely wrong. So with that said, I don't know that there were questions here, but I will like to take, I don't know if anybody's got comments, or I'll just open up to questions, I guess.
Yeah, so great presentation, Michiko, and thank you for doing this. I know it was a little bit short notice, and I know that you had personal things you were dealing with as well. So fantastic presentation. I do have some questions, but I want to open it up to others. I was following the chat, and most people reinforcing the ideas you were talking about. So I think we have a lot of consensus about that. Questions?
I've got a question. Aaron's a 7th grade English teacher. Every year they teach the outsiders. Then the kids have to do an essay for the book. So she went into AI and she typed in some information and she got a pretty good essay out of it. It actually noted paragraphs in the book, page numbers, everything that the book had. As far as plagiarism and the legal aspects, being that she got that off of AI, not off of the outside of the book itself, where does the copyright and the production lie that way?
I'm going to say first that I am not a lawyer, but that is one of the questions. And I don't know that I've seen anything standard that's in terms of how to cite what came out of ChatGPT. What's been talked about a lot is that it will make up citations, right? It's like if you write like an entire research paper and then actually could, put citations that really don't exist. So, but that all of that really is still being talked about. I don't think there's been a consensus.
We do have a professor here that I think has talked to that subject. Maybe she can comment on that, Tina. But I see Rick also has a question. So, Tina, do you have anything to add quickly about that? And then we'll let Rick ask his question.
No, actually, I don't. Thank you, Jim.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought I was talking to some professor. I thought maybe it was you. All right, Rick, go ahead.
Just going to say thank you very much for bringing up all the ethical concerns on this, because we hear so much about lauding, all of the benefits here. And then, like you said before, it's the wild, wild west. We hear this all the time. And there's so many presentations, out there, and yeah, there's not a lot of discussion about the ethics, about working within your competencies, about proper attribution to sources and stuff, which is, like I don't remember if you said or somebody here said that some of those citations just get made up, and I will say that I'm a recent graduate from Purdue, so there were guidelines that were issued. I'll try to see if I can put them in the chat here, but specifically on if you're copying and pasting directly from AI in there, there are ways of finding that out. They use Turnitin, which is AI too, right? But that's going out and finding, what degree of plagiarism you may have used. But they're very specific about, here's what you can do, and here's what you absolutely can't do. And I think it's, for me personally, it's good guidelines for, professional, so what happens in academia on this front may be applicable to what we do professionally. And I'm going to have people that totally disagree with me, but that's okay.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing this in. One of the things I did want to kind of talk about is, to your point, right, that there's a lot of talk about what all the marvels of what AI gives us, right? And then we're sort of surprised when it does something that we don't expect. But then a lot of that, in a sense, is, if we just sat down and thought about it enough, we probably could have figured it out. But there are a lot of things that it's easier to talk about the good things, and to talk about the things that we actually have to think about is really, takes a lot more energy. But that's where sort of our responsibility, right, as humans, consultants and humans at first and consultants second, sort of, we have that responsibility. So thank you for commenting.
I have a question.
Yeah, Jim.
So this might fall in the category of applied AI. About 6 months ago, we had a business issues discussion with a large healthcare provider, think of hospitals, and the business issue they're dealing with is there's a real shortage of nurses.
Mhm.
And so hospitals, healthcare providers are having to try to hire nurses, but nurses are being hired away. And so there's this huge churn in nurses. And there's traveling nurses, but they get extremely expensive. And so in the course of the discussion, the subject of AI was brought up. And I think the vision is that if you walk into a healthcare a hospital and go to a nursing station, where do you tend to find many of the nurses? They're sitting there behind computer screens doing some sort of data entry or research or whatever it is. Is there a way to apply AI to handle a lot of that back office necessary record keeping or whatever they're doing, to let the nurses be front and center with the patients, leveraging their time, making their time more efficient, getting them out of the burden of administration? What's the status of that, and what's the reality? What could be done in that area, and how soon?
So I'm unable to comment on specific use cases. And most in big part here, I'm not really familiar with those particular use cases, but like automating tasks, right, has been around for a while. And so it's just a matter of what do you automate and what's available. And and automation is not the only answer either, right? It's like there are other solutions to optimizing really the workforce. And so in a way, the fact that there is no AI driven solution today doesn't necessarily mean that there's no solution. And I'd also kind of put a little bit of my sort of management consultant hat there and say, okay, so what are the solutions, and what are we willing to delegate? What are you willing to what's more important, and what are and coming back to what are the consequences? And so it's the there are solutions out there. Generally speaking, there are solutions out there. It's just a matter of, okay, let's figure out which one, what is right, and not let AI kind of cloud our ability to solve problems. So that's a big non-answer to a question, but I think we all have sort of like this ideal vision in mind of, okay, no, I don't want to do this, et cetera, but there are other ways to solve it if a perfect AI-driven solution doesn't exist.
Additional questions?
One last question, if I can.
Go ahead, Mandel.
All right, Machiko, one quick question.
Yes.
Just wanted to know in what way I can imagine how AI is all over operations as supply chain management and logistics and things like that. But how have we seen AI be incorporated in the HR functions of companies more from the onboarding or the let's just say from the HR function period?
So there's been a lot of algorithms incorporated in on the recruiting side of things, right? So as you start there, from sourcing to actually looking at resumes to whatever, right? So there's a lot of that, and that's been around even before we started calling it AI. So it's been around for a while. And then some of the kind of onboarding, the workflows, right? Those are being automated, or those are being, and this is not going to be strictly, HR related, but then a lot of the workflows and a lot of things that we used to have are being automated based on, if nothing more than just roles, right? You'd be surprised how many AI companies are selling simple rules and calling it AI. And so and that's kind of where I'm getting to, okay, yeah, we can let them talk about AI, but let us kind of be really clear about what AI is. It's really, it can be anything at the end of the day. And so if there are some there are some specific algorithmic application or their implementation that we know about. Yeah, there are a few things, but then it's really just the matter of, okay, what do we want? How is it making our lives easier or perhaps sometimes harder? And so like I said, the workflow, just automating workflow is kind of an easy one. And then, even like looking at different documents, looking at, sourcing, looking at crawling, to an extent, that's out there. Again, I'm not able to comment really specifically on use cases, but those are kind of a couple of things that I've kind of seen. So I'm sure there's, a lot more.
Makes sense. It sounds like it's more from sourcing, and that's kind of what I understand it also. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Additional questions?
Makiko, my question is about the bias you mentioned.
Yes.
So if you're doing a sort of a technical research about a topic, what I find is it's like you said, whatever is in the internet the most is what you get, even if it's completely wrong and they've gone to a new concept and everything's been disproven, you still get the old stuff. So how can I write my requests to kind of filter out that? Do I just need to say, tell me something only from the last year or something, or?
And I think, there's a whole discipline around prompt engineering.
Right.
That's actually a field. It's becoming a field of study. How to write good questions to large language models. That is actually a field of study. It's going to depend on what you're asking about, and this is also where knowing about the subject already is going to be important. You can't just like take it at face value, because then you get into that exactly what you're talking about. I don't know that I can give you a good answer to that, other than just sort of you have to be able to use your knowledge, or at least be sort of ask intelligent questions, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And
my only thing I figured out is just to ask for newer things, and it'll sort out some of that historic.
And you can actually continue to have conversations, right? But then not only that, so I think that some of the older stuff might be a little bit easier to filter out, but there's bias today in the world about the information about today, right? That also exists, and that's going to be harder to kind of take out. And so it's just, it's like anything else, right? User beware.
Okay, thank you.
Questions? Okay, good. I'm going to ask my questions then. So if I was building an AI toolkit, Machiko, what kinds of things would I want to have for my practice and to be able to introduce to my clients?
I will answer a question with a question. What do you mean by AI toolkit, right? So, because I don't think of AI in terms of tools.
Yeah, that's all right. Well,
I
would define it, I guess, the way you defined it, more systematic, but what are the things that are out there that are available to someone who consults with small businesses to help them automate, do things more efficiently, reduce their risk, all that stuff?
And that would, a lot of that automation, a lot of those sort of intelligence, the intelligence is going to be built into whatever tools that they need in order to run their business, right? And so I think really the idea is to sensibilize, is that a word? Develop conscience about how their tools are evolving, right? And a lot of that's going to be driven by the AI algorithms to make their lives easier. And so particularly with small businesses, it's highly unlikely that they're actually going to be implementing an actual large language model. So that's not quite it, right? And so most likely and very much likely that they're going to be using tools that have functionalities that are driven by some sort of intelligence. And so the question in that case is that, okay, what kind of intelligence? So then you would ask, what kind of intelligence do you need implemented in your tool, and then ask from kind of figure it out from that perspective rather than, okay, here are the AI tools, because the vast majority of tools that we use today, and I'm talking about digital tools, but the vast majority of tools that we use today have some sort of intelligence built in, some better than others, right? And some more than others. And so it's just a matter of, okay, what are the critical sort of intelligence you want in your tools? And what kind of tools do you need? And what are the critical intelligence you want in that tool? And or automation. If you want certain types of automation, what are good automation? What is bad automation, and what are you comfortable with, what you're not comfortable with? The whole idea of comfort level is important, because again, this is where you're going to be delegating what you do to a bot. So
Great. Todd Lowe has his hand raised. I mentioned you, Todd, before you joined, as a consultant who focuses on manufacturing, that you're working with Toyota and embracing AI. So floor is yours.
Well, that must mean why my ears were burning earlier. I was trying to get on. Thanks, I appreciate it. So just a couple of things on toolkits that are out there that we are using quite a bit of is prompts. I don't know if you agree with that, Machiko, or not. What's your thoughts on it?
And it has to do with how do you talk to a large language model, right? It's like that's an entire topic in itself. And yeah, some of those things you have to be really you have to be smart about asking the right question. Of course, the prompting tools, right, are also AI driven, and so then how much of that do you trust? It's then you get it back into the exact same question, right? Are you comfortable with it? Is it asking the right question? Does it reflect what you want it to? So there are some automations. I think there are some with limited success, some better than others. I think it's just kind of, again, what are you comfortable with?
Yeah, I agree. And that's really the critical thing, guys, is at least that I've learned is, you got to separate artificial intelligence, or the term, from machine learning and from just information that you're pulling. And we use the prompts to get the information, but we have used and are using a lot of technology that's been out there forever, such as robots that we call them learn bots now, that basically we just do it and show them how we do it as far as placing the workpiece in the machine or whatever. The robots now are smart enough to learn very quickly, and so there's big differences as far as machine learning and automation. So I think that's where all this kind of comes together. Hope you would agree.
Michiko, I know you mentioned that the idea of an AI enterprise strategy sends shivers up your back, but obviously everybody's looking for it to some extent. And how do you back that into a reality and reset expectations and make some progress on that?
Yeah, so like the AI is whatever the use of AI is, that for the talking from a technology perspective, right? The use of AI is going to be what feeds into their technology strategy, as opposed to, it's like the you can make it a mission to, okay, I'm going to use AI as much as possible and everywhere I've got, and increase the use of AI or something. And that could be a strategy, but it's really the where and why, and what is it that we're trying to solve, right? The same thing happened when predictive analytics became like a really hot thing, maybe 15 years ago. I'm going to use predictive analytics. That's going to be my strategy. Well, great, but what are you going to do? And so that typical failure rate, right, is like 60, 70, 80% of initiatives, data and analytics initiatives are failures, or they don't meet expectations, blah, blah, blah. You basically run into that because you start with, okay, here's a tool, I'm going to have to use it, right? And then the AI kind of gets into the same problem of, okay, here's AI, I'm going to have to use it. Okay, now that you're sort of working backwards and you're having to prove ROI and what you implemented, right? And that's the largely what happened with data and analytics fairly early on, and still continues to happen, by the way. And so whatever we can just kind of stop all that so that we can be a little bit smarter about what we're doing, it'd be great. But that's kind of a starting point for me, is like, let's not talk about enterprise AI strategy. You either, sort of leverage it or you don't. What is it that you're trying to solve? What are the needs, right? This is as basic as getting back to, okay, what are the business needs? I mean, it's hard. It's a hard thing to do because everybody wants something, everybody wants to talk about AI because that's what everybody talks about. And if you don't, then you're going to fall behind, or you feel like you're going to fall behind. But I feel like it's part of our job as management consultants is to kind of help them take a step back.
Have you heard of any particularly effective pilots that helps people to start to crawl before they're trying to run?
There are quite a few. I can't really name them, nothing that comes to mind, but then people talk about it all the time, and there are quite a few. But they are all kind of being done from the perspective of, okay, not from the perspective of let's implement AI. So that's, I think, it's really just the matter. And the other thing that's important too, so a lot of times those kind of pilots there's two different types of pilots, right? That's successful pilots. One is really from the success from the business perspective. It actually does make things better and bring, make things more efficient, effective, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's the other side or another definition of success in terms of technologically it was successful. And I think that's where a lot of organizations tend to, that's the trap that tends to fall into, is that, okay, we successfully stood up an environment, and we have the infra all laid out, et cetera. We've got the code, it's running, et cetera. It seems to be working, it seems to be usable. And that a lot of times becomes a definition of success, and not so much, okay, is it really solving a business problem? Right. And so I think from a technology perspective, we have to be really careful. Okay, if it's a proof of concept, and it's a pilot / proof of concept in the sense that you want to prove the technology concept, right? Then yeah, you can call that a success. But what is it? What are you piloting? What is your goal? How do you know what is success to you, right? And I would start there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Machiko. Machiko, would you be willing to come back and talk more about AI in the future? It's a great topic, and
Sure.
we could probably be on the call for even another couple hours. I don't want to take up more of your time.
Sure.
So yeah, so we're going to do that for sure. I want to encourage people to save the chat. There's a lot of great links in the chat. And in closing, we have Dwight on. Dwight was the president of the ICMCI, and I saw in the link that they're going to be doing a session about ethics in AI. Dwight, in October, I believe. Dwight, you want to talk about that real quickly, and then we'll wrap things up?
Sure, for sure. Yes, we have the annual CMC conference is going live again for the first time in 3 years, since 2019. So it will be in Amman, Jordan. We have a day-and-a-half conference, which follows the day-and-a-half annual meeting of delegates. So the whole conference is on AI. So we're getting speakers from around the world. I've been invited to do to join a panel on the ethics, but it's just going to be full of good information. So go onto the website icmci.org. You can find good information there. Amman is a bit of a journey, but the before and after tours to see such a wonderful country and all the sites there, together with a good conference, is going to be a really great event.
Great. And when are you going to be in Dallas, Dwight?
I'm coming up in towards the end of September, going to visit my new grandson who's living down the road there.
Great. Well, I know a bunch of us would like to get together with you if you have the time. I know that I'm sure you'll have be wanting to spend a lot of time with the grandkids, but the invitation's always open.
I'll reach out to you. We'll see if we can find a lunch, maybe a time for a lunch.
Fantastic. And we did bring up ISO 20700. Dwight is instrumental in bringing that to IMC USA and ICMCI as well.
And congratulations to Mashiko. She's one of our latest graduates.
Okay. I saw a lot of positive comments in the chat, Mashiko. Fantastic presentation. Again, we'll continue it at some point in the future. Please join us next month. Ken Lazat's going to be talking about how you can use thought leadership to get more consulting work. Okay, goodbye, everybody. Have a fantastic weekend. And if you're in Texas, try to stay cool.
Thanks for the invite.
Thank you. Bye-bye.